Do you guys like to rock? Do you guys like great sounding amps? Reliable amps? These things are freaking tanks. Definitely, you can say I have a lot of Marshalls in the shop right now. But one of them is the rarest and the loudest. The Marshall Major, 200 watts. So it's the late 90s, and I'm in Notable Music. Shout out Celeste with my first guitar here, this Mexican Strat, taking guitar lessons with the great Bruce Wacker. Bruce is no longer with us. He would have loved this video, by the way. Bruce, I love you, man. And I'm taking lessons. I'm really trying to impress this guy. Think I'm the coolest thing ever, but this guy, he's not impressed. And I come in with this Webcore reel-to-reel that I rattle canned white, and I modified it. And you have a line out, you can engage the internal speaker, and you can plug a guitar into it. And this thing kind of ripped. It was hideously looking after I spray painted it, but this thing kind of ripped. And I remember him checking it out, and he's like, "This is like what Blackmore did." And I'm like, "Who's Blackmore?" He's like, "Ritchie Blackmore, Rainbow, Deep Purple." I don't know. He said, "Well, that's how he got his sound, but really he got his sound from his modified major." And I'm like, "What's a modified major?" You had the space race and the wattage race. And in 1967, Marshall developed a 200 watt amplifier. There was the Pig version, and then the lead, the bass version, and the PA version. So 4 versions. I've never seen the Pigs, and apparently they don't sound very good. They have like an active EQ, and they have reliability issues. But apparently Mick Ronson played one. I've worked on a few of the early 70s ones, but it's been many, many years since I've actually opened one up. So it's kind of a treat to kind of open this up. Most famous notable user would be Ritchie Blackmore, but his was modified. So at the end of this, we'll do a circuit analysis of the amp, and we'll also talk about what I think they did, where it's cascading inputs, kind of making it into like a master volume for more gain. So we'll do that. I've already opened this up, and I've already given the estimate to the customer, and he's approved. So we're going to pretty much do a full restoration on this 1970 Marshall Major. So this Marshall wasn't owned by Deep Purple or Thin Lizzy, but it was owned by Orlando's coolest band in the early 70s, Tin House.
What's cool about majors is they look industrial. It doesn't look like a commercial guitar amp. It looks like a piece of industrial equipment.
Now on top visual, what do we see? 3 original Brymar preamp tubes. We have 3 6550s RCA. Now this is not what would have been in it out of the factory. This amp is a KT88 amp. And here is a KT88, an actual original Genelex. This tube actually looks to be in fairly decent shape. With these 6550s, not so much. So we want a matched quad of KT88, so we are going to change out these power tubes. Here is our 200 watt ultralinear output transformer. Like I said, very industrially built. It's got to be careful when you're servicing these majors. This is a serious voltage. This is not a toy, obviously. I like how they use a socket hole here for the receptacle for the fan. Got your 3 preamp tubes here. Cracked resistor. Like I said, I have powered this up, and I got a baseline of where we're at. First thing we're going to want to do is change the electrolytic caps. We have 5 cans, 2 bias caps, some caps here for the cathodes. Those are going to go. Then we're going to give it a deep servicing, obviously new power cable, bias a new set of KT88s, change the screen grid resistors, which we're going to talk about. Some have been changed. There's some big guys in here. Then when we can bring it up, power it up, we're going to reevaluate it, and especially want to reevaluate these Erie capacitors. They're probably good. I don't see Erie capacitors much. I'm not that familiar with them. Seen them, but we're going to want to check these out good. We'll use our Sencor for those. These mustards tend to be reliable. I really doubt we're going to have any problem with them. But that's the thing with amp-repair estimates. You know, you kind of get a baseline, you make some judgment calls, you do some service, and then in something like this, which I consider kind of a restoration, then there's a whole other reevaluation for any other issues. That's why it can take a long time. Can't really rush it. And you certainly can't always bill for the time. Thanks, Phil. I like to put a little nail polish on here. These old Marshalls have these beautiful turd boards, the old ones. I like to make it look as original as possible. See? So I'm testing these Erie coupling capacitors, and they all test great. We've tested the value, and with the Sencor we can test with voltage. That's really important. You don't want any DC leakage on these capacitors. And we can actually adjust the amount of voltage. These are 600 volt caps. Test for leakage, and we're actually applying 600 volts to the capacitor. We have no leakage, so these are good. On Amp Mountain, everything is a little controversial, and even screen grid resistors. And as years go on, there's different schools of thought. Here is what we are going to do today. This Marshall originally has these 250 ohm resistors that are bolted down into the chassis. This one is bad because it's bypassed, and this one was put in its place. This one was completely removed, and we have this looks like a brown ohmite here. That is not safe. Another brown ohmite, and then this one original is bad, and this 250 across it is bypassed. I think what we're going to do is we're going to add a vertical terminal to the holes that are already here, and we're going to mount our resistors on that. A little quick talk about screen grid resistors, and a little straight talk too. Screen grid resistor, because we're not really dealing with power tubes normally in guitar amps that are triodes, we have a screen grid. We need to supply voltage to the screen grid in order for that tube to operate. And we have a resistor there to limit the current. Now, their old school way of thinking about it when I was coming up as an amp tech, it was a long time ago, was put in a small value resistor, so if there's a problem with the tube, it blows, and the amp keeps cruising through your show. I don't necessarily, and many techs don't necessarily go that route anymore. We can imagine a scenario where, yeah, that can be true, but generally we're looking for the proper rating or a high wattage rating screen grid resistor, and even upping the resistance, the value of the resistor, to limit the current, especially with modern tubes. Back when you had original KT88s, like in this amp, they had 250 ohm screen grid resistors. Think of a Fender Deluxe with a little 6v6, that has a 470 ohm resistor. And if you think about other Marshalls, it's 1K and even 2K. So this is an ultralinear transformer, so it's a little bit different, but we are going to put in 1.5K resistors. This is a 20 watt resistor. I want this to run cool, and I want to limit the current. So that's what we're going to do. And maybe once it's all up, we might change some things around, but let's start here. I think that's a good estimate to how we want this to run and operate. How cool are these resistors? Okay, just about done. That was easy. Well, actually, no, it took all of Saturday, but anyway, let me show you where we are at. So, change the cans out. new stabilizing resistors. We had that cracked resistor here. You can see that burn mark. So I put in this nice ohmite here, and I put it on a vertical terminal. I feel like that's best practice. I chassis grounded with a new AC cable. We did a deep cleaning and servicing. These are the screen grid resistors here, right? The new terminals that I added. I like how these are performing. I've actually powered it on. Had it on for about a half hour. I've biased the new quad of KT88s. I biased them to about 62% plate dissipation. I feel like that's a good range for this amp. And gonna run some tests right now. And tomorrow we're gonna come in, assemble it, and play it. So let's go. $601 at the plate. Okay, I'm putting in a 1K test tone, and I'm gonna bring up the volume slowly, and I wanna show you the clean headroom. We're gonna look at where it starts to clip. Right there, it's clipping on both sides. Let's bring it down just a hair. Right? So we got about 40.2. We're gonna say 40 volt AC at clipping. So 40 times 40 divided by the load of 8 ohms is we have exactly 200 watts clean. I know I can push it above that. I don't want to blow anything up, but as you can see real quick, there's a lot more room to go. So this has over 200 watts. We have 200 watts of clean headroom. So majors have a fan, and this one needed a lot of work. I had to disassemble it, clean it. I even had to sand down the shaft a little bit. I could not get this to spin. It just, with age, it's a cheap little fan. I think everything just sort of warped over time, and it's working good now. I love fixing fans. I'll tell you, if it was 1969 and I was a kid in A Christmas Story, I want a Marshall Major. No, Santa, I want a 200 watt Marshall with 4 General X KT88s and really low screen grid resistors and a fan that keeps it cool. Kid, you'll be an Amtech. Ho, ho, ho. Okay, so my apologies. We didn't show a lot of the electronics work. Honestly, sometimes when you're working on something a little bit esoteric, running a camera can be a little distracting, and it adds time. And this was a big job to begin with, and there's only so much filming I can do. Instagram, YouTube, it's a lot. Here's the great Ritchie Blackmore with 2 Marshall Majors. Now here's my attempt at the one rainbow riff I know. Thank Tony from Precision Guitars for letting me borrow his cabinets and this power booster here, Electro Harmonics. This amp is so clean that I'm going to put a pedal in front of it. We're going to play some pentagram. I'm dropped down a half step. All right, I found something from high school, a tuning. EBD, BBD. When I was in high school, I would pretty much exclusively play in altered tunings, and I tuned really quick to standard for my lesson. Didn't practice anything. I try to show Bruce all these wild tunings I come up with in songs, and I remember this one. He said, "This is boring. It does not rock, but it is kind of creative and musical, and it's kind of cool." So let's see if I can remember it. This is so trippy. It was a long time ago. It's like riding a bike. Marshall model numbers are really confusing. People often mistake them for the year. They are not. So this is the schematic for the base version of the Marshall Major. Now, let's start with power supply. AC comes in here. We have a 10 amp fuse, on-off switch, massive power transformer, filament, bias supply here. This is our bias pot. These are the electrolytic caps we changed to smooth out the DC for the bias. This is our bridge rectifier. And these are the cans. Now the values were a little different in the amp, and I replaced with what was in the amp, not the schematic. It was 375, 375, but then it was 100, 100. So these would divide, right? So 100 and 100 would divide to 50 because they are in series. And here is our series stabilizing resistors here. The schematic is a little bit different because actually these terminate here and they didn't draw the connection on the schematic, and a connection here would be standard. So let's take a look at the preamp. We have our 4 input jacks here. This is channel 2, and that's the brighter one, bright cap here. And this is channel 1. They share a cathode resistor and cap. The lead version is different. Lead version has the base channel, right? 820, 250. And then the lead channel has a 0.68. So you're going to get a lot of mid-range boost coming out of here. And then for the lead, it comes in here, and that's our bright cap into the next stage. Back to the base version. So we have our 2 channels, 2 coupling caps, 2 plate resistors, another can up here. We have a bleeder resistor here. We have 2 mixing resistors, and we go into this next stage. Also, we have feedback coming in here, negative feedback, and we have our tone stack. Our signal comes along into our tone stack here, and one notable difference between the two is the value of this resistor here called the slope resistor. Very important resistor. 56K on the base version, and look at the schematic of the Fender Bassman 5F6A, and you're going to see a 56K resistor. And look at the lead version of the other major, and we have a 33K. 33K is going to give you a little bit of bite. So we have the 56K, and then we go here into our phase inverter, right? And from the phase inverter into our 4 power tubes, we have a 0.47, and here we have a 0.047. What's the difference? More bass is going to come through on the bass version. We have our 4 power tubes. We have our bias coming in here to the grids, and these are the screen grid resistors that we replaced. We upped it from 1.5K. We have our output transformer. You kind of see the taps here. This is called ultralinear. This one here is our center tap. This is our primary. This is our secondary. And here is our output. And this is our feedback. So the Ritchie Blackmore mod I've read, and what it sounds like to my ears is just basically a cascading input, giving yourself that extra gain stage. So they probably did something like you plug in here and you take your output, you can keep this pot in, right? And then you can feed this pot right here into the either into the jack or into the grid of this tube. Now you have a whole extra gain stage. You have a tremendous amount of gain, and then you can almost use this like a master volume, and then you can go through the rest of the amp. So you're going to get a tremendous amount of gain and preamp distortion, and just a lot more grit than you would the standard, older version of the Marshalls. Not only was Bruce my guitar teacher, but we worked together for a couple years at Notable Music in Middletown, New Jersey. That's him in Red Bank, Monmouth Music, where I bought my first guitar. I found this clip of him in the Stone Hill Band 1990 on Facebook. I never heard him talk about this band, but I think the fireworks at the end made me decide that this was the keeper and the one to put in the video. I'll let this roll out.